They said he was nobody, just another kid from the wrong side of town. But what happened on that school bus changed everything. Nobody saw it coming, not even me. Before I continue, if stories like this inspire you, subscribe to the channel now, so you don't miss the next ones. I still remember that morning like it was yesterday. The smell of diesel and the sound of kids laughing as they climbed onto the yellow bus. I was driving my usual route through Pine Creek, a town divided by train tracks. On one side, beautiful homes with manicured lawns. On the other, where I picked up Tommy Wilson, things were different. Tommy was 12, small for his age, with clothes that never quite fit right. His sneakers were held together with duct tape, and his backpack had been mended so many times it was more patch than original material. But there was something in his eyes, a quiet strength that most people missed because they were too busy looking at everything else. That particular Tuesday in October was colder than usual. Tommy was standing at his stop, shoulders hunched against the wind, wearing just a thin jacket. He climbed onto my bus with a quiet, "Morning, Mr. Reynolds," like he did every day. Most kids barely acknowledged my existence, but not Tommy. He always had that respectful nod, that genuine greeting. The bus filled up as we moved toward the wealthier neighborhoods. The kids from Hampton Hills got on with their expensive clothes and the latest phones. Among them was Jackson Miller, the star quarterback whose dad owned half the businesses in town. And there was Lily Chen, a quiet girl who'd moved to town a few months ago. She was smart, won every academic competition, but kept to herself. Tommy sat alone like he always did. The unspoken rule was that nobody sat with the trailer park kid. I watched in my rearview mirror as he stared out the window, seemingly lost in his own world. What I didn't know then was how much that world contained. As we approached the final stop before school, a group of older boys got on. They were led by Derek Patterson, a known troublemaker from the 8th grade. I had reported him twice already this year for bullying, but his father was on the school board, so nothing ever came of it. The atmosphere on the bus changed immediately. Kids got quieter, looked down at their phones, or stared intently out the windows. Nobody wanted to catch Derek's attention. I kept my eyes on the road but remained alert to the tension building behind me. It didn't take long. Derek and his friends moved down the aisle looking for targets. They stopped when they reached Lily's seat. She was reading a book, completely absorbed until Derek snatched it from her hands. "What's this? Math for fun? What kind of freak reads this stuff?" Derek laughed, holding the book high above her head as Lily tried to grab it back. "Please give it back," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. I was about to pull over and intervene when something unexpected happened. Tommy stood up. In all the months I'd driven him, I had never seen him engage with the other kids. He was invisible by choice, I think. But now he was walking toward Derek, his face determined. "Give her the book back," he said, his voice steady despite being half Derek's size. The bus went completely silent. Even I held my breath, glancing in the mirror while trying to keep the bus on the road. Derek looked stunned for a moment, then burst out laughing. "Look who found his voice. The charity case thinks he's a hero." Derek's friends joined in the laughter, but Tommy didn't move. He stood there, unwavering. I said, "Give it back." Tommy's voice was still quiet but had an edge of steel to it now. Derek's amusement turned to anger. "Or what, trailer trash? What are you going to do about it?" What happened next happened so fast I almost missed it. Derek shoved Tommy hard, expecting him to fall back. But Tommy somehow kept his balance. When Derek moved to push him again, Tommy didn't fight back. Instead, he positioned himself firmly between Derek and Lily. "You'll have to go through me," Tommy said. Derek's face turned red with rage. Gladly, he pulled back his fist and I immediately started slowing the bus, ready to stop and break things up. But before Derek could throw his punch, the bus hit a pothole. The jolt sent Derek stumbling forward, and his friends, not expecting the sudden movement, fell against the seats. In the moment of confusion, Tommy reached up and calmly took the book from Derek's hand. He handed it back to Lily, whose eyes were wide with surprise and gratitude. Derek regained his balance, furious now. "You're dead, Wilson," he hissed. I had finally managed to pull the bus over. "That's enough," I called out, standing up and looking back at them. "Derek, front seat now. Tommy, you too. Different sides." Derek stomped to the front, muttering threats under his breath. Tommy returned to his original seat without argument. For the rest of the ride, an uneasy quiet settled over the bus. When we arrived at school, I asked Tommy and Derek to stay behind. Derek's father might have been on the school board, but on my bus I made the rules. Derek, one more incident and you'll be walking to school for a week. Understood? He glared at me, but nodded. You can go, I told him, and he stormed off the bus. Tommy waited, probably expecting a similar warning, but I just looked at him for a long moment. That was a brave thing you did, I finally said. Tommy shrugged. Didn't feel brave, just felt right. Sometimes that's the same thing, I told him. You can go. He nodded and turned to leave, but then stopped. Mr. Reynolds, please don't tell anyone, it'll just make things worse. I agreed, though reluctantly. As I watched him walk into the school, shoulders slightly hunched as if trying to disappear again, I couldn't help but wonder about the life this kid led that made him simultaneously so brave and so afraid of being noticed. If this story has touched you so far, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because there are other real and emotional stories that you don't want to miss. The incident might have ended there, just another moment in the daily drama of school bus politics. But 2 days later, something happened that changed everything. It was raining that Thursday morning, a heavy downpour that had most kids running from their front doors to the bus with jackets over their heads. Tommy was already soaked when he climbed aboard, his thin jacket offering little protection. But what caught my attention was the bruise on his cheek and his split lip. He saw me looking and quickly averted his eyes. Fell off my bike, he mumbled before I could ask. I didn't believe him for a second. The defensive posture, the way he winced when he sat down. I'd seen it before in other kids over my 15 years of driving this route. Something was wrong at home. And after what had happened with Derek, I had my suspicions about what might have triggered it. When Lily got on at her stop, she hesitated, then walked past her usual seat and sat down next to Tommy. He looked up, surprised. Thank you, she said softly, for the other day. Tommy just nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. You're in Ms. Garcia's math class, right? I've seen you there, Lily continued. Another nod from Tommy. You're really good at fractions, I noticed during the last quiz. Tommy finally spoke. Not as good as you. You got everything right. Maybe we could study together sometime? Lily suggested. Before Tommy could answer, Derek and his friends boarded the bus. Derek's eyes immediately locked onto Tommy and Lily sitting together. His face twisted into a mean smile. Well, he said loudly, making his way down the aisle. Trailer Trash found himself a girlfriend. I watched in the mirror as Tommy tensed. Lily looked scared but didn't move away from him. Leave us alone, Tommy said, his voice low. Or what? You going to cry to your drunk dad again? Oh wait, that didn't work out so well for you, did it? Derek gestured to Tommy's bruised face and laughed. The bus went quiet. Even kids who normally ignored the drama were watching now. I slowed the bus, ready to intervene again, my mind racing with the implications of what Derek had just said. Tommy's face had gone pale. Lily looked from him to Derek, understanding dawning in her eyes. Shut up, Tommy whispered. Derek leaned in closer. Everyone knows your dad beats you when he's wasted, which is like, always. Is that why you're playing hero? Trying to prove you're not a loser like him? I had heard enough. I pulled the bus over and stood up, ready to put an end to this cruelty. But before I could say a word, something unexpected happened again. Lily stood up. She was tiny compared to Derek, but her voice was clear and strong. The only loser here is you, Derek. Everyone on this bus is sick of you. Derek blinked in surprise, then recovered with a sneer. Sit down, math freak. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is, she insisted. Tommy stood up for me, and now I'm standing up for him. That's what friends do. Friends. The word seemed to hang in the air. I could see Tommy looking at Lily with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. Derek looked around the bus, expecting support from his usual audience. But the mood had shifted. Other kids were standing up now. Jackson Miller, the quarterback, was the first, surprising everyone. She's right, Derek. Back off. Then Emma from the debate team. Then 2 more kids, then another. Derek's face flushed red as he realized he was losing control of the situation. Whatever, he muttered, retreating to a seat at the back. I continued driving, my mind racing. What had just happened was remarkable. Not just Tommy's initial act of bravery or Lily's defense of him, but the way it had created a ripple effect. The social hierarchy of the bus, a microcosm of the school itself, had been disrupted. When we arrived at school, I watched as Tommy and Lily walked in together, several other kids joining them, talking and laughing as if they'd been friends all along. The transformation was so sudden it almost seemed unreal. But I couldn't shake what Derek had said about Tommy's home situation. If it was true, and the bruises suggested it was, I had a responsibility to report it. Tommy had asked me not to tell anyone about the incident on the bus, but this was different. This was about his safety. I made my way to Principal Gardner's office as soon as all the kids had disembarked. Barbara Gardner had been running Pinewood Middle School for over a decade. She was tough but fair, and she cared deeply about her students. "Frank," she greeted me as I entered her office. "This is unexpected. Everything okay with the route?" I closed the door behind me and sat down. "Not exactly. There's a situation with one of the students that I'm concerned about. Tommy Wilson." Her expression turned serious. "What's going on?" I told her everything. The incident with Derek and Lily, Tommy's bruises this morning, and what Derek had said about Tommy's father. As I spoke, Barbara's face grew increasingly concerned. "I should have noticed," she said when I finished. "He's so quiet in school, always trying to be invisible. But his teachers have mentioned he's bright, just withdrawn." "What happens now?" I asked. "I'll contact Child Protective Services immediately. They'll investigate. In the meantime, I'll have our school counselor check in with Tommy. Carefully, of course." I nodded, relieved that action would be taken but worried about Tommy's reaction. He asked me not to tell anyone about standing up to Derek. He's going to know I broke that promise. Barbara sighed. "You did the right thing, Frank. Sometimes looking out for these kids means making the hard calls." I left her office feeling a mixture of guilt and resolve. I hoped Tommy would understand someday that this was about protecting him, just as he had protected Lily. Throughout the day, I couldn't stop thinking about Tommy. When afternoon came and it was time for the return route, I found myself watching for him with particular attention. The kids loaded onto the bus in their usual chaotic manner, but there was no sign of Tommy or Lily. Principal Gardner had probably pulled them both in for discussions. Just as I was about to close the doors, Barbara herself appeared, leading Tommy and Lily onto the bus. Tommy's expression was unreadable, but Lily was holding his hand, a gesture of support that spoke volumes. Barbara gave me a subtle nod before stepping back, and I knew some action had been taken. Tommy and Lily made their way down the aisle, and I noticed something remarkable. Kids were making space for them, offering smiles and greetings. Whatever had happened during the school day had furthered the transformation I'd witnessed that morning. As we drove, I kept glancing in the mirror. Tommy was quiet, but he was talking softly with Lily and Jackson, who had joined them. Derek was conspicuously subdued at the back of the bus. When we reached Lily's stop, she hesitated before getting up. "See you tomorrow, Tommy," she said, loud enough for me to hear. It wasn't just politeness, it was a promise. Tommy nodded, a small smile appearing briefly on his face, the first I'd ever seen from him. As the bus emptied stop by stop, I grew increasingly anxious about Tommy's situation. What would be waiting for him at home after CPS had likely visited? When we reached his stop, I made a decision. "Tommy," I called as he stood to leave. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" He approached cautiously, standing in the aisle near my seat. "I know about the meeting with Principal Gardner," I said quietly, "and I want you to know that I was the one who spoke to her this morning." His face fell, a look of betrayal crossing his features. "You promised not to tell," he said, his voice barely audible. "About the incident with Derek and Lily, yes. But when I saw those bruises this morning, Tommy, I couldn't stay silent about that. No one has the right to hurt you, not even your father." He looked down at his worn sneakers. "What's going to happen now?" "I don't know exactly," I admitted, "but things are going to change, and I believe they're going to change for the better." He didn't respond, just continued staring at his feet. "Tommy, look at me," I said gently. He raised his eyes reluctantly. "What you did for Lily was brave, but sometimes the bravest thing is letting others help you." A tear slipped down his cheek, which he quickly wiped away. "I don't know how," he whispered. "You just did," I told him. "And you don't have to figure out the rest alone. You've got Lily now, and Jackson, and the others. And you've got me too, every morning and every afternoon, for as long as you need." He nodded, another tear escaping. "Thanks, Mr. Reynolds. One more thing," I added. "I want you to take this." I handed him a card with my phone number on it. "If you ever feel unsafe or just need someone to talk to, anytime, Day or night, you call me. Understand? He took the card, looking at it with surprise before carefully tucking it into his pocket. Okay, now get going. I think there might be someone waiting for you. I nodded toward the window where I could see a woman standing near the bus stop. She wasn't familiar to me, but the official-looking badge visible on her coat told me all I needed to know. Tommy glanced out, his body tensing. Who is she? Someone who's going to help make sure you're safe, I said. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded, straightening his shoulders slightly. See you tomorrow, Mr. Reynolds, he said, and stepped off the bus. I watched through the windshield as Tommy approached the woman. She spoke to him gently, kneeling slightly to meet his eye level. After a brief conversation, they walked together toward his home, the woman's hand hovering protectively near his shoulder without quite touching him. I sat there long after they disappeared from view, the empty bus silent except for the soft patter of rain on the roof. In 15 years of driving kids to and from school, I'd seen countless dramas unfold on my bus. Friendships form and break, romances bloom and wither, bullies rise and fall. But something about Tommy's quiet courage had touched me in a way nothing else had. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tommy, wondering if he was safe, if the woman from Child Protective Services had been able to help him. I considered calling Principal Gardner at home but decided against it. There were proper channels for these things and I'd already set them in motion. The next morning I approached Tommy's stop with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Would he be there? Or would his father have pulled him out of school in retaliation for the CPS visit? The relief I felt when I saw him standing at the curb was overwhelming. He looked different somehow, still wearing the same worn clothes, still carrying the patched backpack, but his posture was straighter, his gaze more direct as he climbed the steps. "Morning, Tommy," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Morning, Mr. Reynolds," he replied, then hesitated. "Thanks for yesterday." The words were simple, but the look in his eyes told me more than any lengthy speech could have. Something had changed for the better. As he made his way down the aisle, I noticed another change. Kids greeted him, not everyone, but enough to matter. When Lily boarded at her stop, her face lit up at the sight of Tommy, and she immediately sat beside him. Derek was subdued that morning, glaring from the back of the bus but making no move to bother anyone. I later learned that Principal Gardner had called his parents in for a serious discussion about his bullying behavior, with the threat of suspension hanging over his head. For the next few weeks, I watched a remarkable transformation unfold. Tommy began to open up, smiling more, talking with other kids. He and Lily became inseparable, their friendship blossoming in the way only middle school friendships can, intense, genuine, and without pretense. I learned bits and pieces about what had happened after the CPS visit. Tommy had been temporarily placed with his grandmother, a kind woman who lived in the next town over. She drove him to the bus stop each morning and picked him up each afternoon. His father was required to attend parenting classes and alcohol treatment before Tommy could return home. These changes alone would have been enough to call the story a success. A boy rescued from a bad situation, a bully held accountable, new friendships formed. But what happened next took everyone by surprise. It started with a math competition. Ms. Garcia, the math teacher, announced that the school would be sending a team to the regional finals. Lily, of course, was an automatic selection. To everyone's surprise, she insisted that Tommy be included too. "He's really good, Ms. Garcia," she argued. "Better than he lets on." Tommy protested, but Ms. Garcia decided to give him a chance, administering a special test to evaluate his skills. The results shocked everyone except Lily. Tommy had a natural gift for mathematics that had gone completely unnoticed. Word spread quickly through the school. The quiet boy from the trailer park, the one most people had barely noticed before the bus incident, was a math prodigy. Teachers began reviewing his previous work with new eyes, discovering that beneath his reluctance to draw attention to himself lay a bright, inquisitive mind. Principal Gardner called me into her office again, this time with a very different purpose. "Frank, I wanted to update you on Tommy Wilson's situation, since you played such a crucial role in bringing it to our attention," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "How is he doing?" I asked, though I'd seen the changes myself on the bus. "Remarkably well. His grandmother is providing a stable home environment, and he's flourishing academically now that we've recognized his abilities." She smiled. "But that's not the only reason I wanted to speak with you. Tommy mentioned something that I think you should know about. She handed me a piece of paper, an essay Tommy had written for his English class. The assignment had been to write about someone who had made a difference in their life. I felt a lump form in my throat as I read the title, The Bus Driver Who Saw Me. In simple, honest words, Tommy had described how I had been the first adult to truly see him, not just his worn clothes or his quiet demeanor, but his actions and his character. How my intervention had not only protected him from his father, but had also given him the courage to stop hiding who he was. He wants to read this at the school assembly next week, Principal Gardner said. It's our annual Everyday Heroes event. Usually students talk about firefighters or doctors or military personnel, but Tommy was adamant that you were his hero. I was speechless, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. Of course we need your permission, she continued. Some of our bus drivers prefer to maintain their privacy. He can read it, I managed to say, my voice thick with emotion. I'd be honored. The day of the assembly, I arranged to switch routes with another driver so I could attend. I slipped into the back of the auditorium just as it was starting, not wanting to draw attention to myself. Several students spoke, sharing stories about their chosen heroes. Then Tommy stepped up to the podium. He looked small up there, but his voice carried clearly through the room as he began to read. Most people don't notice bus drivers, he started. We get on, we get off, and the person behind the wheel is just part of the background. But Mr. Reynolds wasn't background to me. He was the first person who saw what was happening and did something about it. As Tommy continued reading, recounting the incidents on the bus and how they had changed his life, I noticed something extraordinary happening in the audience. Students were turning to look at each other, whispering, nodding. Teachers were wiping away tears. This wasn't just Tommy's story anymore. It was becoming a moment of collective recognition, a shared understanding that small acts of courage and kindness could change everything. Mr. Reynolds taught me that being brave isn't about being fearless, Tommy read, approaching the end of his essay. It's about being scared but doing the right thing anyway. He showed me that sometimes the most important thing one person can do for another is simply to see them, really see them, when everyone else is looking away. He paused, then looked up from his paper, scanning the audience until his eyes found mine at the back of the room. Mr. Reynolds, thank you for seeing me. The applause was deafening. Students and teachers rose to their feet, many turning to look at me. I hadn't wanted recognition, had in fact tried to avoid it, but in that moment, I understood that this wasn't just about me. It was about acknowledging that heroes don't always wear capes or uniforms. Sometimes they just drive buses and pay attention. Principal Gardner beckoned me to the front, and I reluctantly made my way through the crowd. When I reached the stage, Tommy surprised me with a hug, quick and a bit awkward, but completely genuine. As the applause continued, Gardner leaned toward the microphone. This is exactly what our Everyday Heroes Assembly is about, she said, reminding us that heroism isn't just for special occasions or emergencies. It's about the choices we make every day and how we treat each other. She turned to me. Mr. Reynolds, would you like to say a few words? I hadn't prepared anything, had never expected to be standing on that stage, but looking out at all those faces, especially Tommy's, shining with pride and gratitude, I knew what needed to be said. I'm not a hero, I began, my voice rough with emotion. I'm just someone who drives a bus and tries to keep kids safe while they're on it. What happened with Tommy? I glanced at him, standing tall beside me. Well, Tommy was the brave one. He stood up for Lily when no one else would. He showed courage long before I did. I looked out at the sea of young faces. The truth is, I see heroism on my bus every day. I see it when someone makes room for a kid who usually sits alone. I see it when someone stands up to a bully. I see it when someone offers a kind word to someone who's having a tough day. I cleared my throat. If there's one thing I've learned from driving you all to school for 15 years, it's that heroes aren't special people. Special people are heroes, and every single one of you has that potential inside you. The assembly ended with another round of applause, but what happened afterward was even more remarkable. Kids approached me in the hallway, some to thank me, others to share their own stories about things they'd witnessed on the bus or in school. Teachers stopped me to express their gratitude, a few admitting they hadn't always paid enough attention to the quiet kids like Tommy. But the most significant moment came when Derek Patterson approached me as I was leaving the building. He hung back until the crowd had dispersed, clearly uncomfortable but determined. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, his voice lacking its usual swagger. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" "Of course, Derek," I replied, surprised. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, avoiding my eyes. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry," for how I acted on the bus, for what I said to Tommy. I studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. "I appreciate that, Derek, but I think Tommy's the one who deserves that apology." He nodded. "I know. I already talked to him. He was cool about it, better than I would have been." He finally looked up at me. "My dad and I had a long talk after Principal Gardner called him in. He wasn't happy at first, but then..." He trailed off. "Then what?" I prompted gently. "Then I told him some stuff I never told anyone. About why I act the way I do sometimes." He swallowed hard. "He's getting me some help. A counselor to talk to." I felt a surge of hope for this boy who had caused so much trouble but was clearly fighting his own battles. "That takes courage, Derek. Admitting you need help." A small, uncertain smile appeared on his face. Tommy said the same thing. As I drove my afternoon route that day, the bus felt different. The usual chatter and laughter were there, but there was also a new awareness among the kids. A shift in how they interacted with each other and with me. Small kindnesses that might have gone unnoticed before now seemed to carry more weight. Tommy got on at his usual stop, accompanied by his grandmother now instead of walking alone. Lily waved him over to sit with her and Jackson. Even Derek gave him a nod of acknowledgement as he passed. When we reached Tommy's stop on the return journey, his grandmother was waiting. As Tommy descended the steps, she approached me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, reaching for my hand, "I wanted to thank you in person. What you did for my grandson, I can never repay you for that. He's a special kid," I told her. "I'm just glad he's getting the chance to show everyone what I saw in him." "He told me about the assembly today," she said with a smile. "Said the whole school gave you a standing ovation." I felt my cheeks warm. It was more about Tommy than me. "No," she said firmly, squeezing my hand. "It was about both of you. About how one person willing to stand up can change everything." She glanced at Tommy, who was waiting a few steps away. "His father's doing better, you know. The treatment program, the parenting classes, they're making a difference. He's been sober for 3 weeks now." "That's good to hear," I said, genuinely pleased for Tommy's sake. "It's not fixed yet," she cautioned. "There's a long road ahead, but there's hope now. And that started with you." As I continued my route, dropping off the remaining students, I reflected on her words. There's hope now. Sometimes that's all it takes. A spark of hope, a moment of courage, one person willing to see what others have missed. The story could have ended there, with Tommy safe, his academic gifts recognized, new friendships formed, and even his father taking steps toward recovery. But life isn't that neat, and real change rarely happens overnight. 2 weeks after the assembly, I noticed Tommy seemed subdued when he boarded the bus. The sparkle that had begun to appear in his eyes was dimmed, his responses to Lily and the other kids shorter than usual. I kept an eye on him in my mirror, concern growing as I observed his withdrawn demeanor. When we reached the school, I called out to him as the other kids were disembarking. "Tommy, got a minute?" He approached my seat, eyes downcast. "Everything okay?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "Fine." I'd been driving kids long enough to know that fine rarely meant fine. "You sure? You seem a little down today." He hesitated, then sighed. "My dad's coming home this weekend. The counselor says he's ready for a supervised visit." "Ah, now I understood. How do you feel about that?" "Scared," he admitted in a whisper. "What if he goes back to how he was before?" I nodded, acknowledging his fear. "That's understandable, Tommy. But remember, things are different now. Your grandmother is there. The counselors are involved. And you're not alone anymore." He looked up at me. Would you come to meet him?" "My grandmother said I could invite someone who makes me feel safe." The request caught me off guard. In 15 years of driving, I'd met countless parents at school events or bus stops, but I'd never been invited into a student's home, never been asked to step that far across the boundary between professional and personal. Yet looking at Tommy's face, I couldn't refuse. If your grandmother is okay with it, I'd be honored. The relief in his expression was immediate. "Thanks, Mr. Reynolds. I knew you wouldn't let me down." That Saturday, I found myself driving my own car instead of the bus, following directions to Tommy's grandmother's modest but well-kept home. I'd dressed carefully in khakis and a button-down shirt, wanting to make a good impression for Tommy's sake. His grandmother greeted me warmly at the door. "He's been watching for you," she said, leading me into a small living room where Tommy sat nervously on the couch. Beside him was a man I instantly recognized as his father. They had the same eyes, the same set of the jaw. "Dad," Tommy said, standing up. "This is Mr. Reynolds, my bus driver, the one I told you about." Tommy's father rose slowly, extending his hand. "Jim Wilson," he said, his voice rough but his gaze steady. "I hear I owe you a debt I can never repay." I shook his hand. "Frank Reynolds. And you don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone would do." "But that's just it," Jim replied. "No one else did. For years no one saw what was happening. Or if they did, they looked the other way." He glanced at Tommy, regret etched deeply in his face. "Including me. I couldn't see past my own pain to recognize what I was doing to my son." We sat down, the atmosphere tense, but not hostile. Tommy's grandmother brought coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for Tommy, then tactfully excused herself to work in the garden, giving us privacy while remaining within earshot. "Tommy's told me everything," Jim continued. "How you stepped in, how you reported what was happening, how you supported him afterward." He took a deep breath. "I was angry at first. Felt like you were interfering in something that wasn't your business." I nodded, understanding. "Many parents feel that way initially. But then my counselor helped me see that what you did wasn't about judging me. It was about protecting Tommy." He looked down at his hands, something I had failed to do. Tommy, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. "Dad's been sober for 6 weeks now," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "And he's got a new job starting next month." Jim smiled faintly. "Assistant manager at the hardware store. Not glamorous, but it's honest work with steady hours. Better than the construction gigs I was piecing together before." "That's great," I said sincerely. "I'm in a halfway house now," Jim continued, "going to meetings every day, working the steps." He looked at Tommy. "I can't change what I did, son. I can't take back the hurt I caused you. But I promise you I'm doing everything I can to be the father you deserve." Tommy nodded, his expression a complex mixture of hope and wariness. "I know, Dad." The visit continued for about an hour, the conversation gradually becoming less strained. Jim asked about Tommy's progress in school, listening with evident pride as Tommy hesitantly shared news about the math team and his improving grades. They even laughed together once or twice, revealing glimpses of a relationship that, while deeply damaged, wasn't beyond repair. As I prepared to leave, Jim walked me to the door while Tommy helped his grandmother in the kitchen. "Thank you," Jim said quietly. "Not just for what you did for Tommy, but for coming today. It means a lot to him. Having you here, it made him feel safe." "He's a remarkable kid," I replied. "You should be proud." "I am," Jim said, his voice thick with emotion. "More than I can say. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to earn back his trust and be worthy of having a son like him." As I drove home, I thought about second chances and the difficult road of redemption. Jim Wilson had a long journey ahead of him, and there would undoubtedly be setbacks along the way. But seeing him and Tommy together, watching them take those first tentative steps toward healing, had given me a new perspective on my role in their story. I hadn't just reported abuse or supported a student in need. I'd been part of breaking a cycle that might otherwise have continued for generations. Tommy now had a chance at a different future, one where he understood that strength didn't mean enduring pain in silence, that asking for help wasn't weakness, and that standing up for others was worth the risk. The following Monday, Tommy boarded the bus with a lighter step and a genuine smile. "How'd the rest of the visit go?" I asked him quietly as the other kids filed past. "Good," he said. "We played chess. I won twice." "That's great, Tommy." He hesitated, then added, "He's coming again next Saturday. If you wanted to stop by again sometime, that would be okay." I smiled. "I'd like that. Maybe I could challenge the chess champion myself." He grinned. "You'd lose." "Probably," I agreed with a laugh, "but I'd give it my best shot." As he made his way down the aisle to where Lily was saving him a seat, I realized something profound. In trying to help Tommy, I'd received an unexpected gift in return. I'd been reminded of why I'd become a bus driver in the first place. Not just to transport kids safely from point A to point B, but to be one more adult in their lives who cared, who paid attention, who saw them. The story of Tommy, the school bus, and the transformation that followed spread beyond our school. A local newspaper reporter heard about the Everyday Heroes Assembly and asked to interview both Tommy and me. At first we were reluctant. Neither of us was comfortable in the spotlight, but Principal Gardner pointed out that sharing our story might inspire other schools to pay more attention to quiet kids like Tommy, might encourage other adults to speak up when they noticed signs of trouble. So we agreed, on the condition that the focus be on the larger issues of bullying and child welfare, rather than painting either of us as heroes. The reporter, a thoughtful woman named Sarah Chen, respected our wishes. Her article, titled "The Power of Being Seen: How One School Bus Became a Catalyst for Change," was sensitive and thought-provoking. What none of us expected was how widely it would resonate. The story was picked up by regional news outlets, then national ones. Suddenly, Tommy and I were being asked to appear on morning talk shows and give interviews to magazines. We declined most of them, uncomfortable with the attention and wary of how the media might sensationalize the story. But we did accept an invitation to speak at a conference for school transportation personnel from across the state. Standing at the podium beside Tommy, looking out at a room full of bus drivers, monitors, and administrators, I felt a profound sense of purpose. Bus drivers see things teachers don't, I told them. We see kids in their unguarded moments. Early in the morning when they're still waking up, in the afternoon when they're decompressing from the school day. We see who sits alone and who's surrounded by friends. We see the dynamics that play out when adults aren't watching, or at least when kids think adults aren't watching. Tommy spoke next, his voice gaining confidence as he continued. Mr. Reynolds noticed what was happening because he paid attention. He didn't just drive the bus, he cared about the kids on it, and that made all the difference for me. The impact of our presentation was immediate and tangible. School districts began implementing enhanced training for bus drivers, focused on recognizing signs of abuse and bullying. Some created formal reporting systems that made it easier for drivers to share concerns about students. Others established closer communication channels between transportation staff and school counselors. But perhaps the most meaningful result came from the kids themselves. The students at our school, inspired by Tommy's story, created an initiative they called No Empty Seats, a commitment that no one would have to sit alone on the bus or in the cafeteria. They designed buttons with a simple logo, a bus seat with two stick figures sitting together. The transformation wasn't instantaneous or complete. There were still instances of bullying, still social hierarchies and cliques, but there was also a new awareness, a collective recognition that everyone deserved to be seen and included. As for Tommy, his life continued to improve in ways large and small. His father maintained his sobriety and eventually regained shared custody, with Tommy spending weekdays with his grandmother and weekends with his dad. His academic talents flourished under the guidance of teachers who now recognized his potential. And his friendship with Lily deepened, the two of them becoming inseparable champions of the school's anti-bullying initiatives. Derek Patterson surprisingly became an ally rather than an adversary. The counseling he received helped him address the issues underlying his bullying behavior, and he gradually began using his social influence to stand up for kids who might otherwise have been targets. It wasn't a complete transformation. Old habits die hard, especially in middle school, but it was a start. One day, nearly a year after the original incident on the bus, Tommy stayed behind after the other kids had disembarked. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, approaching my seat, "I wanted to give you something." He handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a framed photograph of Tommy, Lily, and several other students standing in front of my bus, all wearing the No Empty Seats buttons. Along the bottom they had signed their names and Tommy had written a simple message: "Thank you for seeing us." "Tommy, this is," I began, my voice catching. "Principal Gardner helped us get it done," he explained. "We wanted you to have something to remember everything by, since next year we'll be in high school." The reminder that Tommy would soon move on to high school, with a different bus driver, different routines, hit me harder than I expected. I'd grown accustomed to seeing him every day, watching his progress, being part of his journey. "I'm going to miss you on my route," I admitted. He smiled, a confident, genuine smile that bore little resemblance to the hesitant expressions of the boy I'd first met. I'll still be around. My dad's house is actually in your neighborhood now. The apartment above the hardware store, remember? I'll be staying there on weekends." I nodded, relieved to know our connection wouldn't be completely severed. "Besides," Tommy added with a grin, "someone has to check in and make sure you're still keeping an eye on all the kids, right?" I laughed. "Right. And someone has to defend your chess champion title." As he hopped off the bus with a wave, I looked again at the photograph in my hands. So much had changed in a year. For Tommy, for the school, for me. What had begun as a simple act of intervention had rippled outward, affecting lives in ways I never could have anticipated. Driving an empty bus back to the depot, I reflected on the power of seeing and being seen. How many other Tommies were out there, I wondered, just waiting for someone to notice them? How many other lives might be transformed by a moment of courage, a decision to speak up, a willingness to extend a hand? I couldn't save every child, couldn't solve every problem, but I could keep my eyes open. I could pay attention. I could remember that sometimes the most important thing one person can do for another is simply to see them, really see them, when everyone else is looking away. And sometimes that makes all the difference in the world. That photograph sits on my dashboard to this day, a reminder of what can happen when someone simply pays attention. Life moves on, but some moments stay with you forever, changing who you are in ways you never expected. The morning after Tommy gave me that picture, I woke up with a strange feeling, a mixture of pride and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was purpose. I'd been driving that bus for 15 years, thinking I was just moving kids from one place to another. But Tommy had shown me I was doing something much more important. I remember pulling up to the school that day and noticing something different. Kids were wearing those "no empty seats" buttons everywhere. Not just a few. Almost everyone had them pinned to backpacks, jackets, even shoelaces. Principal Gardner was standing at the entrance greeting students, one of those buttons prominently displayed on her blazer. "Morning, Frank," she called as I opened the bus doors. "Have you seen the news?" I shook my head, confused. "Our story went viral overnight. That reporter, Sarah Chen, her article got picked up by national media. We've been getting calls all morning." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Tommy had finally found stability, was making progress. The last thing he needed was media attention, bringing everything back to the surface. "Don't worry," Barbara said, reading my expression. "I'm screening everything. Tommy's welfare comes first." I nodded gratefully. "Has he heard?" "Not yet, but he will. Kids have phones." She sighed. "I've asked the counselor to check in with him first period." Throughout the day I kept thinking about Tommy, wondering how he was handling the sudden attention. When afternoon came and kids streamed onto the bus, I watched for him with special attention. He boarded with Lily, both of them talking animatedly. Instead of heading straight to their usual seats, they came up to me. "Mr. Reynolds," Tommy said, his eyes bright with excitement. "Did you hear? Schools in 5 states are starting no empty seats programs." The worry I'd been carrying all day melted away at his enthusiasm. "That's amazing, Tommy." A school in California emailed Principal Gardner asking if we'd do a video call with their student council, Lily added. "They want to know how to start their own program." I smiled, relief washing over me. Tommy wasn't upset by the attention. He was embracing it, seeing it as a way to help other kids like him. As they settled into their seats, I overheard Tommy telling Lily, "Maybe this is what I'm supposed to do with my life, you know? Help kids who don't have anyone standing up for them." That night I couldn't stop thinking about Tommy's words. At 12 years old, he'd already found a sense of purpose many adults spend their lives searching for. He'd taken his pain and was transforming it into something powerful, something that could change lives. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity. Schools across the country reached out, wanting to implement their own versions of the No Empty Seats program. Tommy, Lily, and a small group of students worked with Principal Gardner to develop materials other schools could use, simple guidelines, ideas for activities, ways to get kids involved. The local news came to film a segment about the program. I tried to stay in the background, but Tommy insisted I stand with him during the interview. "None of this would have happened if Mr. Reynolds hadn't been paying attention," he told the reporter. "He showed me that one person can make a difference, and now we're trying to do the same thing." Standing there beside him, hearing the conviction in his voice, I felt a surge of emotion I couldn't quite contain. This wasn't just about a bus incident anymore. It had become something bigger, something that might actually change how schools approached bullying and isolation. The reporter turned to me. "Mr. Reynolds, how does it feel to know your actions had such a profound impact?" I hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound trite or self-important. I just did what felt right in the moment. I never expected all this. I glanced at Tommy. But seeing what these kids have done with it, it's humbling. They're the real heroes of this story. Tommy shook his head. We're all heroes. Every person who chooses to see someone who feels invisible. His words stayed with me long after the cameras were gone. Every person who chooses to see someone who feels invisible. Such a simple concept, yet so powerful. As the school year wound down, preparations began for Tommy and his classmates to transition to high school. There was a palpable sense of anticipation mixed with anxiety, the natural reaction to any big change. But for Tommy, the stakes felt higher. With the progress he'd made, the confidence he'd gained, the friendships he'd formed, would they survive the move to a bigger, potentially less supportive environment? I voiced these concerns to Principal Gardner during one of our now regular check-ins about Tommy's progress. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted, "which is why I've arranged something special." She explained that she'd been in communication with the high school principal, sharing Tommy's story and the impact of the No Empty Seats program. Together, they had decided to expand the program to the high school, with Tommy, Lily, and their friends taking leadership roles as freshmen. "We're calling it a leadership transition program," Barbara explained with a smile. "But really, it's a way to ensure Tommy and the others have a built-in support system from day one." The last day of middle school arrived with the usual excitement. Kids signing yearbooks, teachers giving final words of wisdom, everyone looking forward to summer freedom. As I drove my morning route for the final time that school year, there was a festive atmosphere on the bus. Tommy was one of the last to board, having moved back in with his father now that Jim had proven his commitment to sobriety and responsible parenting. The change in their relationship was evident in small ways. The easy conversation as Jim walked Tommy to the bus stop, the genuine "love you, son" as Tommy climbed aboard, the confidence in Tommy's "love you too, Dad" in response. As we pulled up to the school for the last time that year, Tommy lingered until the other kids had disembarked. He approached my seat, something clutched in his hand. "I wanted to give you this before summer," he said, handing me an envelope. Dad helped me with it. Inside was a handmade card, carefully crafted with colored pencils and markers. On the front was a drawing of a school bus with a big heart where the stop sign would normally be. Inside, Tommy had written a message that brought tears to my eyes. "Mr. Reynolds, thank you for being the person who saw me when I felt invisible. You didn't just change my life. You showed me how to change others' lives too. That's a gift I'll never forget. Have a great summer. Your friend Tommy." Beneath his signature was another note in different handwriting. "Frank, words can't express what you've done for my son and through him for me. You gave us both a second chance when many wouldn't have bothered. If you're willing, I'd like to buy you a coffee sometime and thank you properly. Jim Wilson." I looked up to find Tommy watching me nervously. "It's not much," he said, "but Dad and I wanted you to know." I didn't let him finish, pulling him into a quick hug instead. "It's perfect, Tommy. Thank you." He smiled, then turned to go, pausing at the steps. "See you next year, Mr. Reynolds. Not on the bus, but around. Dad says you should come for dinner sometime." "I'd like that," I told him sincerely. As he ran off to join his friends for their last day of middle school, I tucked the card carefully into my pocket, a tangible reminder of why my job mattered. Summer passed in its usual lazy rhythm. I took some time off, visited my daughter in Arizona, tackled a few house projects I'd been putting off. But thoughts of Tommy and the coming school year were never far from my mind. I met Jim Wilson for that coffee he'd suggested. We sat at a small cafe downtown, two men from different worlds finding unexpected common ground. "Tommy's doing great," Jim told me, pride evident in his voice. "He's in a summer math program at the community college. The professor says he's got real talent." "That doesn't surprise me," I replied. "He's a special kid." Jim nodded, turning his coffee cup slowly between his hands. "He wants to help other kids when he grows up. Says maybe he'll be a teacher or a counselor, someone who looks out for the quiet ones. He'd be good at that." "Yeah." Jim's eyes met mine. "Serious now. He gets that from you, you know. That sense of responsibility for others." Before, before everything happened, he was different. Withdrawn, afraid to draw attention. Now he's talking about making a difference in the world. I shook my head. That was always in him. He stood up for Lily before I ever got involved, remember? True. Jim smiled faintly. But you showed him that adults could be trusted. That standing up for what's right actually matters. That's something I failed to teach him. You're teaching him now, I pointed out. Every day you stay sober, every time you show up for him, that's what counts. We talked for nearly 2 hours, sharing stories about Tommy, discussing the challenges of the upcoming transition to high school, even discovering a shared interest in fishing. By the time we parted, I felt I'd gained not just insight into Tommy's home life, but perhaps even a friend. The first day of the new school year arrived. Though Tommy would no longer be on my route, I'd arranged with the transportation department to drive past the high school after my morning drop-offs just to see how things were going. I told myself it was professional curiosity about the No Empty Seats program, but in truth, I simply wanted to make sure Tommy was okay. As I approached the high school, I saw something that made me pull over in amazement. Students were lined up at the entrance, forming a kind of welcome tunnel. Each wore a brightly colored t-shirt with the No Empty Seats logo, and they were high-fiving incoming freshmen as they walked through. At the head of the line, directing operations with the confidence of a seasoned leader, was Tommy. Beside him stood Lily, handing out buttons to the new students. Even from a distance, I could see Tommy's face glowing with purpose and pride. I watched for a few minutes, not wanting to intrude but unable to drive away. As if sensing my presence, Tommy looked up, scanning the street until he spotted my bus. His face broke into a wide smile and he waved enthusiastically. I honked twice in response, our old signal from the bus route, and he laughed, giving me a thumbs up before turning back to welcome another group of nervous freshmen. Driving away, I felt a profound sense of completion. Tommy was going to be fine. More than fine. He was going to thrive, and in some small way, I'd been part of making that possible. That afternoon, I had new students on my route, new faces to learn, new dynamics to observe, new stories unfolding before me. As they boarded, I greeted each one by name, making eye contact, really seeing them. Some responded with surprise, others with shy smiles, a few with suspicious glances. In the middle of the route, I picked up a boy who reminded me of Tommy in so many ways. Worn clothes, hunched shoulders, eyes that avoided contact. He slid into a seat near the front, alone. At the next stop, a girl boarded, scanning the bus for a place to sit. I watched in my mirror as she hesitated, then deliberately sat down beside the boy. "Hi," she said. "I'm Emma." He looked up, startled at being addressed. "I'm Daniel," he replied after a moment. "Cool," Emma said with a smile. "Want to see something?" She pulled a button from her backpack, a No Empty Seats button. "My cousin goes to the high school. They started this program about making sure nobody feels left out. I thought maybe we could start something like it at our school." Daniel's face registered interest for the first time. "How does it work?" As Emma explained, I smiled to myself. The ripples were spreading further than I could have imagined. Tommy's courage had inspired Lily, which had inspired their classmates, which had inspired other schools, which had now reached Emma, who was reaching Daniel. One small action, seeing someone who felt invisible, had created a wave of change that continued to grow. And that, I realized, was the true power of what had happened on my bus that day. Not just that one boy had been saved from a bad situation, but that thousands of kids might now have someone who sees them when they feel unseen. The bus drove on, carrying its precious cargo of young lives and untold possibilities, and I drove with a new awareness of the profound responsibility and privilege of my job. I wasn't just a bus driver. I was a witness to the daily struggles and triumphs of these kids, a consistent adult presence in lives that sometimes had too few of them, a potential catalyst for change. Tommy had called me his hero, but the truth was, he had become mine. His courage in the face of adversity, his willingness to stand up for others even when he himself was vulnerable, his determination to transform his pain into purpose. These were lessons I carried with me every day now. As the school year progressed, I heard updates about Tommy from time to time. The No Empty Seats program at the high school was flourishing under his leadership. His math abilities had earned him a spot on the competitive team that would represent the district at state finals. His father had celebrated 1 year of sobriety. Occasionally, I'd spot him around town, at the grocery store with his dad, at the library with Lily, volunteering at community events. Each time, his face would light up with recognition, and we'd exchange a few words, a connection maintained despite the natural separation that comes with growing up and moving on. One afternoon in late spring, nearly 2 years after the original incident on the bus, I received a letter from the state education department. Inside was an invitation to a ceremony honoring innovative anti-bullying programs, where the No Empty Seats initiative would receive special recognition. Tommy had requested that I attend as his special guest. The ceremony was held at the state capitol building, a grand affair with educators and administrators from across the state. Tommy, now 14 and noticeably taller, gave a speech that brought the audience to their feet. He spoke with poise and conviction about the importance of seeing those who feel invisible, of creating schools where every student feels valued and included. 2 years ago, I was that invisible kid, he told the crowd, afraid to speak up, afraid to be noticed, carrying burdens no child should have to carry alone. But one person saw me, really saw me, my bus driver, Mr. Frank Reynolds. He turned to where I sat in the audience, gesturing for me to stand. Reluctantly, I did, uncomfortable with the attention but unwilling to disappoint Tommy. Mr. Reynolds didn't look away when he saw something wrong. He didn't decide it wasn't his problem. He acted. And that single action changed not just my life, but the lives of thousands of students across our state and beyond. The applause was thunderous. As I sat back down, my cheeks burning with embarrassment but my heart full, I realized something important. Tommy no longer needed me to be his protector or advocate. He had found his voice, his purpose, his path forward. My role in his life had naturally evolved from rescuer to witness, someone who could simply watch with pride as he continued to grow and make his mark on the world. After the ceremony, as we stood amid the crowd of well-wishers and officials, Tommy pulled me aside for a moment of quiet conversation. "I'm going to be okay, you know," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "You don't have to worry about me anymore." I smiled, touched by his perceptiveness. "I'll probably always worry a little. That's what happens when you care about someone." He nodded, understanding beyond his years. "I wanted to tell you something. I decided what I want to do when I grow up." "Oh?" I raised an eyebrow. "Not mathematics?" "Well, that too," he grinned. "But I want to be a school counselor. I want to be for other kids what you were for me, someone who sees them when no one else does." In that moment, standing in the grand hallway of the Capitol building with this remarkable young man who had overcome so much, I felt a sense of completion I'd never experienced before. The circle was closing. Tommy would go on to help others, who would in turn help others, the ripples continuing outward in ways I might never see but could always know existed. "You'll be great at it," I told him, meaning every word. As we walked back to join the others, Tommy's father approached, pride evident in every line of his face. 2 years sober now, Jim Wilson was a different man from the one I'd first heard about. Steady, reliable, fully present for his son. "Frank," he said warmly, shaking my hand, "thank you for coming today. It meant the world to Tommy." "I wouldn't have missed it," I replied truthfully. Jim glanced at his son, now surrounded by a group of educators eager to learn more about the No Empty Seats program. "Look at him," he said softly. "Sometimes I can hardly believe that's my boy." "He's extraordinary," I agreed. "He gets that from his mother," Jim said with a sad smile. "She always saw the best in everyone, always stood up for the underdog. I wish she could see him now." It was the first time Jim had mentioned Tommy's mother. I'd gathered from bits and pieces that she had passed away when Tommy was very young, but the subject had never been directly addressed. "She'd be proud," I said simply. Jim nodded, blinking rapidly. "You know what Tommy told me last week? He said maybe everything happened the way it was supposed to. That if I hadn't hit rock bottom, if you hadn't reported it, if he hadn't gone to live with his grandmother, none of this would have happened. No Empty Seats wouldn't exist." I considered this. He might be right. Sometimes the hardest chapters of our lives lead to the most important ones. "That's my son," Jim said, his voice rough with emotion, always finding the light in the darkness. As we drove back to Pine Creek that evening, Tommy fell asleep in the backseat of Jim's car, exhausted from the excitement of the day. I followed in my own vehicle, thinking about all that had happened since that morning on the bus 2 years ago. So much had changed. For Tommy, for his father, for the school, for me. What had begun as a simple act of intervention had grown into something none of us could have anticipated, touching lives far beyond our small town. I thought about the new kids on my route, especially Daniel and Emma, who had started their own version of no empty seats at the middle school. I thought about the principals and teachers implementing the program at schools across the state. I thought about all the children who might now be seen and heard because one boy had found the courage to stand up on a school bus, and one adult had chosen not to look away. The highway stretched before me, familiar yet somehow new. I'd driven this road countless times, but tonight it seemed to hold special significance. A path forward, a journey continuing. Tomorrow I would wake up and drive my bus route again. I would greet each child by name, watch for the quiet ones in my mirror, be present and attentive to the small dramas unfolding in the seats behind me. It wasn't a glamorous job, not one that usually earned recognition or acclaim, but Tommy had shown me its true importance, the power of being one caring adult in a child's life, of truly seeing those who feel invisible, and sometimes that makes all the difference in the world. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and comment below which part moved you the most. And before you go, there's a recommended video right beside this one that will give you goosebumps. Watch it now. Which part of this story did you connect with the most? Have you ever been the person who noticed someone who felt invisible?